Hey Optimancers, Chris here. Today I'm going to be talking about the Spirit Guardian spell and explain why I think it's such a great spell choice when available and what tactics we can use to get the most out of this spell. So here's the spell. So Spirit Guardians is a 3rd level spell. It is available to clerics. It is also automatically prepared if you are part of the war domain, and Oath of the Crown paladins also get it automatically prepared. Bards, of course, can take this as magical secrets. And there are some other setting-specific ways we can get it on our character build. 3rd level spell, 1 action to cast, and it has a duration of 10 minutes using our concentration. Normally, I would expect that if a spell is going to last for 10 minutes, so if we can hold our concentration for the full duration, we should be able to get multiple combats out of this, depending on the kind of campaign we're playing, and if we're doing multiple combats, like one right after the other. You call forth spirits to protect you. They flit around you to a distance of 15 feet for the duration. If you are good or neutral, their spectral form appears angelic or fey, your choice. If you are evil, they appear fiendish. As of Tasha's, reskinning is part of the game officially, so you can have your Spirit Guardians look pretty much however you want. When you cast this spell, you can designate any number of creatures you can see to be unaffected by it. An affected creature's speed is halved in the area, and when the creature enters the area for the first time on a turn, or starts its turn there, it must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the creature takes 3d8 radiant damage if you are good or neutral, or 3d8 necrotic damage if you are evil. On a successful save, the creature takes half as much damage. When you cast a spell using a spell slot of 4th level or higher, the damage increases by 1d8 for each slot level above 3rd. So I want to make some general observations here before we start getting into specific stuff. The first thing is that this spell could do radiant damage or necrotic damage based on our alignment. Normally, I'd expect that player characters are going to be good or neutral, but not always. But if we are choosing between radiant damage and necrotic damage, there is no question I think radiant damage is the better of the two options. There are just far fewer creatures in the game that are resistant to radiant, and there are a number of creatures in the game that are actually vulnerable to radiant damage. I'm only aware of a couple Eberron setting specific monsters that are vulnerable to necrotic damage. So given the choice, I would always recommend radiant. The next thing I want to mention is that it says that an affected creature's speed is halved in the area. This has no saving throw. So if a creature is affected by this spell, in other words, we haven't chosen for them to be unaffected by it, their speed is halved in the area. But what this doesn't say is that it's treated as difficult terrain or anything like this. So this could actually be interpreted a couple different ways, and I'll show you those on a battle map. The third thing I want to just note here before we move from the spell description is it says that the spirits flit around you to a distance of 15 feet for the duration. So this does not have a 30-foot diameter. This is 15 feet around our character. So in all directions around our character, for 15 feet, we should have the Spirit Guardians. So that's the spell. Let's take a look at it on a battle map. Now here I've got a cleric, and they have used a Spirit Guardian spell. We can see the Spirit Guardians flitting around them. In this case, our party is doing battle with a stone golem. Now I have put a circular Spirit Guardians on the map, though actually, I think it should probably be square. And I do have a video explaining that, which I will link up above. But you know what? This looks better. So for this demonstration, we'll be using this circular version. So the most basic use of this spell is to deliver reliable, continuous damage to our enemies. With 3d8 damage, so assuming we are casting it with a 3rd level slot, I'd expect to average 13.5 on our damage roll. Creatures are still going to take half damage even if they make their saving throw. So we would actually expect a creature with, say, a 50-50 chance of making their save to take just over 10 points of damage at the start of their turn. Now if we are using the square version, which I think fits the rules as they're written better, and is explained in Xanathar's Guide to Everything, we can see that this goes 7 squares across and down. Now excluding the square we're in, that is 48 squares total that are affected by the Spirit Guardians. If we have creatures in all of those squares, every single one of them is taking damage. So in theory, this spell could deliver just incredible sums of damage. And that is talking about 2 dimensions, because the wording here is not that this works in 2 dimensions, that they flit 15 feet around you. So that would include above you, or if you're flying, below you as well, thus increasing the area in which this is affecting. But there are ways that we can make this bigger yet. Let's say we were to become large-sized. This could be done a number of ways. Maybe somebody casts Enlarge Reduce on us. Maybe we have 3 levels of Rune Knight and we use Giant's Might. Maybe we're also a Druid and we wild shape into a large-sized creature. This is now an 8x8 area. And excluding the area that we're in, that's 60 squares now covered by this effect. And again, that's not including the 3rd dimension. And if we become bigger yet, we will cover even more area. So there is a definite advantage to being able to become larger when we have Spirit Guardians up, because we can, at least in theory, get more creatures with it, or make it so that creatures who want to move around us are going to have a more difficult time. Now, I think it's pretty obvious to say that the more creatures we can get in this effect, the better it's going to be. So 1 creature is really our worst case scenario. But even in our worst case scenario, we can get more out of Spirit Guardians than 10 damage around. I want to talk about some of the ways we can do that. So if we are here and we cast Spirit Guardians, the Stone Golem is now inside the area of effect, which means at the start of the Stone Golem's turn, it's going to make its saving throw and it's going to take damage regardless of whether it succeeds or fails. But let's say we backed up 5 feet before we cast the spell. Now the Stone Golem is not in the area of effect. Then we could use something like the Telekinetic feat. So this allows us as a bonus action to telekinetically shove a creature we can see within 30 feet of us. When we do so, the target must succeed on a strength saving throw, and if they fail, they're moved 5 feet towards us or away from us, our choice. So in this case, what we could do is we could cast the spell here and then attempt our telekinetic shove against the Stone Golem. If it fails its save, we can now pull the Stone Golem 5 feet towards us. When we do so, the Stone Golem has entered the area of effect. And how that works is laid out in the spell description. It says, when the creature enters the area for the first time on a turn, so that can be any turn, or starts its turn there, it must make a Wisdom saving throw or take the damage. So in this case, the Stone Golem has now just entered the area on a turn, our turn. And at that point, it immediately is going to have to make a Wisdom saving throw, and then it's going to take some damage. And what's nice here is that at the start of its turn, it will take damage again. So it's taking 2 instances of the Spirit Guardian's damage before it ever takes an action. So we're basically doubling our damage. But if the creature makes its saving throw, then what we want to do is, after we realize we have failed to telekinetically shove it, then we would move, and so it's in the area, so at least it will still take the damage at the start of its turn. Or maybe we would do that. It really depends on who we have in our party, and what the initiative order looks like, because there are other ways to get more damage out of the Spirit Guardians. So let's say up here at the top, this is a Warlock in our party. So perhaps they go after us. What they could do is maybe move 30 feet, say over to here, and then they could do something like Eldritch Blast with Repelling Blast, and if they hit, they would push the creature into the area. It has now entered the area on their turn, and it is going to take the damage, and once again, take it again at the start of its turn. So we have another character right there, and they're going to grapple this creature. Maybe they're a grapple build. They usually like to grapple things and then shove them prone. So in this case, what they would do is they'd initiate the grapple, and then they would use the rules for dragging a creature to drag the creature out of the Spirit Guardians. And then they would use the rest of their movement to drag the creature back into the area, thus giving it the Spirit Guardians damage again. And there are countless features in the game that could be used this way. The limit is that if they go in and out of the area more than once on a turn, they would only take the damage once. But as long as it's a different turn, they will take the damage again and again and again. And like I said, this is worst case scenario. This is 1 creature. If we have multiple creatures, we can do much, much more damage than that. So when we're talking about how much damage a Spirit Guardians inflicts, it really depends on a lot of things. How many creatures are we facing? How close are they together? How close can we get them together? How many times can we pull them in and out of the effect? All these things are going to dramatically affect the damage. Here's something that might not affect the damage though as much as you think, and that is our casting ability score. Now I picked the Stone Golem for my example, and the Stone Golem has a terrible wisdom saving throw, so I would actually expect this creature to probably fail their save. But let's say we were picking a creature with at least a moderate chance of success. So this is a young red dragon. We can see it has a wisdom save bonus of +4. Now let's say our character is 5th level. So this would be a challenging encounter, so with the Stone Golem, but both very winnable encounters for a 5th level party that is optimized. So what is our saving throw going to be? Well, it depends what our wisdom is. It could also depend on our charisma or intelligence based on how we achieve Spirit Guardians. But in our case, we're assuming a cleric, so we're using wisdom. So at 5th level, our proficiency bonus is +3, and our DC is going to be equal to 8 plus our proficiency bonus plus our wisdom modifier. So even if we had a wisdom of 10, our DC is already 13. That means that this creature would probably make their save. They would need to roll a 9 or higher. But if we say had a wisdom score of 16, then it would need to roll a 12 or higher. But let's go all out. Let's say somehow we have achieved a 20 wisdom. All right, so we've got a 20 wisdom on a 5th level character. That is possible to achieve, but it requires some planning and significant investment. How much does that investment pay off? On a failed save, the creature would take, on average, about 13.5 points of damage. And on a successful save, it takes half that much. So we're going to start out with our cleric having a wisdom score of 10. Of course, 10 is a terrible wisdom score for a cleric to have, but I just want to make this point. So let's say we have a wisdom score of 10. Our save DC would be 8 plus our proficiency bonus, which is 3, and 0 wisdom bonus. So we would end up with a save DC of 11. That means this dragon would have a 70% chance to succeed. They just need to roll a 7 on their saving throw to succeed. So a failed saving throw is only going to happen 30% of the time. And you can see the math there. It ends up being 4.05 for failed saving throws. Then it's going to succeed on its saving throw 70% of the time, meaning 4.73 from that 70%. Our average damage against this creature would be 8.78, so just a little bit under 9 points of damage around. This is, of course, just an awful wisdom score. I want you now to guess. So we've got 8.78 average damage per round on a wisdom of 10. If we increased our wisdom to 20, how much would this go up? So if we were to have a wisdom score of 20, now our save DC is 16, and this creature would need a 12 on their roll in order to succeed, meaning they would have a 55% chance of failing their saving throw or a 45% chance of succeeding. So failed saving throws now account for 55% of the times that we do damage, and that contributes 7.4. Successful saving throws 45% of the time, contributes about another 3, and our total average damage ends up being just under 10.5. If you recall, a wisdom of 10 gave us about 8.8. So we're talking about 1.6, 1.7 average damage difference from 10 points of wisdom. I gotta suspect that most of you thought the difference would be more than this, but it's really not that much different. So the point I'm making is that if we're looking at ways to increase our damage by doing Spirit Guardians, getting that damage more than once is very effective. Increasing our wisdom actually doesn't give us that much. It's not nothing, but it isn't very much. Now I want to talk a little bit about some strange wording in the spell. So it says, an affected creature's speed is halved in the area. What does that mean? I think we can safely say that if this creature is in the area, and it normally has a 30-foot movement speed, it has a 15-foot movement speed. So if it wanted to move upwards, let's say, it would get 15 feet and then its movement would be complete. However, things get strange when you are entering or leaving the area, because the creature's speed is halved in the area. So, like I said, at the start of its turn, it's got 30-foot movement speed halved because it's in the Spirit Guardians, and now it has a 15-foot movement speed. So this creature has 15-foot movement, and let's say it moves 5 feet this direction. Now it is outside the effect. Now its speed is 30. Its speed just improved to 30. The question that I would ask is, how much of its movement speed is left? Because it started with 15-foot movement speed, it used 5 feet of movement, that would have normally given it 10 feet left, but now it has 30-foot movement, it's moved 5 feet, does it still have 25 feet of movement left? And the reverse works similarly in that it's really difficult to understand how it's supposed to work. So this creature has 30-foot movement speed. Let's say it's going to charge our cleric. So it moves 15 feet to here. It has 15 feet of movement speed left, but it has a 30-foot move. And now it moves to here, and it now has a 15-foot movement speed, and it's moved 20 feet on its turn. So has it used more movement than it was allowed? Is this even a legal movement? So I think there's 3 different ways we could interpret this interaction. So the first would be if the creature is moving within the area, basically it uses double its movement. So if it starts with a 30-foot movement, it moves 5 feet within a Spirit Guardians, we remove 10 feet from its maximum movement speed. That's not exactly how it's written, but that is one way we could run it. Another way we could run it is if it starts its turn in the area, its movement speed is halved. So if it starts its turn, it's got a 15-foot movement speed, even if it leaves. And if a creature starts outside, even if it enters, it doesn't have its movement speed halved. Or we could run it exactly as it's written, and then we end up with some really odd interactions, because this move right here would be an illegal move, because it would require that this creature moves 20 feet with 15 feet of movement, which it can't do. So I guess it would stop just outside the edge of the Spirit Guardians, but we end up with some really odd interactions. I actually think that method makes the least sense and is the hardest to run. Personally, what I do is if creatures move within a Spirit Guardians, I basically have it take double the movement. That's my way of running it. I think it's just an easier and more intuitive way in order to run that interaction. Now, I did look to see if the designers had commented on how this is supposed to work, and I wasn't able to find anything. So to my knowledge, the designers have never talked about this interaction and how it is supposed to work. So if you are a DM, you're probably just going to have to make up your own mind on how you want to run it. Last thing I want to talk about is multiple Spirit Guardians. So let's say we have 2 characters capable of casting this spell, and they're lined up as they are right here. Well, now we have a Stone Golem that is in 2 different Spirit Guardians. What happens? Well, according to the rules, the effects of different spells add together while the durations of those spells overlap. The effects of the same spell cast multiple times don't combine, however. Instead, the most potent effect, such as the highest bonus from those castings, applies while their durations overlap. Now, as a DM, you can apply that rule or you can choose not to apply that rule. But officially speaking then, this is the same spell cast multiple times, and the effects of those spells shouldn't stack. So one of the effects of those spells is delivering damage when you enter the effect and when you start your turn in the area. So the way the rules are written, this creature would only take this damage once. But I would check with my DM, because if I am going to have multiple characters capable of casting Spirit Guardians, there could be huge advantages to those 2 creatures standing side by side and both casting Spirit Guardians if the DM rules that the creature is going to take the effect more than once. All those things I talked about, dragging and pushing and telekinetically shoving, we could basically get double the effect from all of it. So, like I said, I think it's worth checking with your DM, because I have heard of lots of players and DMs who think that the damage effects should stack. But if you play it, rules as written, then which of the Spirit Guardians do you use? And I think that whichever one is cast at a higher level is likely going to be the one that takes effect. But if they're cast at the same level, then I would imagine whoever has the higher casting stat is the one that will take effect. And if those are equal as well, then I would imagine you just pick one, right? It wouldn't matter. The players could pick which one of their Spirit Guardians does the damage. Now, I mentioned on a previous video that I thought that Spirit Guardians would work nicely with the ability to fly, and somebody asked me why. Why do you care about flying with Spirit Guardians? And there's a couple reasons. The first, I think the most obvious reason is if we are fighting flying creatures and we're using a spell with a set distance, Spirit Guardians is going to be pretty useless if we can't also fly. I mean, there are potentially things we can do if we can inflict force movement, if we can force that creature to fall by some means, especially if we can have them fall into the Spirit Guardians. There are ways we could combine Spirit Guardians with a battle against a flying creature, but our options are way more limited. And if that flying creature is playing with any kind of tactics, I think it's going to be really hard for our Spirit Guardians to do anything. And then what we're doing is we are expending resources and concentrating on something that has no impact on the fight. So that's the big one. But I do think there is some other advantages to flying as well. For one, we could fly directly above a creature, and that puts the creature closer to the center. If a creature is closer to the center, we are going to get more out of its reduced movement speed. In addition, if the creature doesn't have any kind of reach or ranged attacks, we could potentially just float out of the reach of that enemy and continually deliver damage. Another thing is, when we cast a spell, we need to be able to see the creatures we're going to exclude from it, and any creatures after that aren't excluded. So let's say we had one of our player characters happen to be around a corner when we cast a spell. Well, that character, we cannot exclude them because we couldn't see them when they cast a spell. This could be another advantage of flying. So in this case, what we could do is we could fly at a distance above this enemy so that the Spirit Guardians ends 5 feet above the ground. Now this enemy is going to be in the effect, so they're going to have the slowed movement, they're going to take the damage. But our allies could move in and out of the area, and they'd be moving underneath the Spirit Guardians and not be affected by it. But the main thing is dealing with flying enemies. And when we talk about spells that have like a minute duration, we can choose to cast those spells when the battle begins. That's when we're going to be doing those spells. So we know what we're facing. So we know what kind of spells we want to use. In the case of Spirit Guardians, where you have a 10-minute duration, it is very likely you're going to be entering combats where Spirit Guardians was cast in a previous combat, or maybe just out of combat altogether, so you won't necessarily know what you're fighting. So you enter combat, happens to be a flying enemy. There are lots and lots of potential flying enemies in this game. We want to have the ability to fly if we have Spirit Guardians, or we're going to be heavily disappointed with a spell, or we're just going to have to drop it and we lose the resource. So that's my tactics video on Spirit Guardians. Hope you find it helpful. Otherwise, until next time, gonna sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.